Well, welcome to another episode of the YA podcast. If you're just now joining us, you're kind of joining us toward the end of the conversation. We've had a bunch of episodes come out before this, so you'll have to, after you listen to this one, go back and check out the other episodes. We've been walking through the chapters of our new book, Winning Young Adults in Our Harvest Field, and this is chapter 6, Discipleship Matters. Today with me and Lorenzo, we have Dr. Joseph Brasher. Joseph, welcome.
What's up? What's up? Good to see you. Good to hear you guys, talk to you guys, and excited to be on here.
Thanks for joining us. Tell everybody a little bit about you, where you're serving at, your family, all of that.
Yeah. So I grew up in West Tennessee and grew up there, met my wife there, and began actually working in banking and finance, and then God called me into the ministry out of that, and so I began serving at Second Baptist up in Union City, Tennessee, and then God called me down to Millington First Baptist. I spent about 5 years there, and then the door opened for me to come over here to Middle Tennessee, Murfreesboro, this little church over here called New Vision, and so I get to serve here as adult pastor, and I've been here now about 5 years as well. And it's been great. Just really enjoy it. Just I oversee all the adult ministry that happens. So anything that touches groups, events, men, women, recreation, co-ed. I mean, if it has something to do with an adult, I'm involved with it here. And so we do that. And married to Brittany. We've been married. It'll be 16 years in September. And we have 2 girls, Ellie Grace and Abby. And I even got a girl dog named Jingles. So what's up with that, man?
A lot of estrogen going on.
A lot going on. You're kind of being overwhelmed.
So that's why I like to go fishing. That's why I like to go hunting.
That's right.
And get out of the house. And so I do my stuff there. But so involved in that, and then just help to just serve in a lot of different ways. And so honor to be a part of this, and just involved with as well with higher education. Work a little bit with what's called Williamson College. It's there in Franklin, and so it's just just kind of got my hands on a lot of different things, but just involved and just want to further the kingdom more than anything else in different ways. So excited to be here, a part of this.
Man, that's awesome. It's awesome to hear kind of your journey, and you hit a lot of different areas like that you've mentioned. I'm sure it resonates with a lot of our listeners of the different contexts that you've been in. And so discipleship, you've probably seen it in a lot of different contexts in your own personal life. You've seen it as you've been on staff. Tell us a little bit about your heart for discipleship.
Yeah, a lot of it came from just kind of my out of my personal journey, my personal walk with Christ. And so I was saved as a senior in high school, even though I grew up in the church, and I just realized that I didn't have a personal relationship with Christ. And so, but from that as well, I probably sinned far worse after I got saved than before I got saved. And that really just kind of, just took me on a journey of just understanding about the difference in relationship and fellowship, and just needing that truth just to be, secure in my heart, and, just understanding, just what God had done through sending Jesus and the cross and the resurrection. And so a lot of that came out of even a post-college experience of where I was a young adult. I was, working in a banking environment, in a management environment, trying to figure out, kind of what this freedom really does look like in my life, and what is that going to be. And so it took me on just a journey of discovery, but also a journey as well of just having people around me in the church and helping to build me up. And so being in community is such a valuable thing, especially for young adults. And it just helped to solidify further and further just those foundational truths that you just got to have a hold of. And then from there, just seeing how that just led to this hunger for the word, this desire to just be just a light for Christ, and no matter what. And so it was almost even a little bit more of just sanctification, just putting off and putting on more of Christ in my life, which we never finished doing by any kind of means. And so all to say is, that's where the hard discipleship really came from. And, just understanding just that young adult mind, that young professional, somebody that's in college, post college, that just needs that foundational truth. Man, I get it, right? You're trying to figure things out. You want to know, is this stuff for real? How can I stand in the midst of this culture today? And listen, God does stand in the midst of it, but you got to have community around you to help build you up through those hard times. So that's where that really kind of came from, and wanting just to help people just grow in that. And so having this heart for college and young adults and these young marrieds now, and just seeing understanding of just what it is just to form a family, and we're just those first few years as a married couple and as parents, and just what all's involved in that. So it's such a big ministry that's out there and it's valuable for the next generation. So
I've been a beneficiary, we all have, of some great people that have discipled me throughout my life. And I'm grateful that a lot of those people have kind of come through family. And my dad's one of 9 kids, and he's 7 boys, one of 7 boys. And so his brother, along with my dad, obviously, who's had a major impact in my life, but his brothers have had also a profound impact on my own life. Can you talk about a little bit just about, and you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but just some people that have like discipled you on your journey that has had like major impacts in your life? Have you gone through different things on this kind of journey that you're on now?
Yeah, and I don't mind naming names, because I think it just points to just who they are and where they are even today. I think about through my college years, Sean Oldham was such a influence. He was pastor at First Baptist Martin, and that's where I attended college, was at UT Martin. And the thing that happened to me during my college years of living in being a part of a fraternity there is that we lost 2 fraternity brothers in a very short amount of time, through different accidents that happened. And I remember, just being able to go to Dr. Singh's office and him just sitting down and just counseling me during that time. And that was such a formative moment for me. And he may not remember that, but I surely do. And it was just that was just such a hard time to go through in that. But I think even after that, I had a Sunday school teacher. He was a teacher, he was a coach. And now what's interesting is that now he's a pastor down around New Orleans. His name is Clint Newsom, and Clint was there for me whenever I was, just first stepping into being a young adult. And then whenever I got to Milan, I think about like Craig Witt. I think about guys like Todd Shepard that were a Sunday school teacher, and he was just a deacon in the church, and just how formative that they were, just encouraging to me. And then eventually, even as I transitioned into ministry, because we never stop being discipled, even though we may be disciplers, we have to always be open to being discipled. And I think of Dr. Alan England, who's a pastor over in East Tennessee, and just the impact that he's just had in my life, and so many other just people that have just come around and encouraged in that. But I mean, those are the people that I can look back and I can say, okay, those were people that God put into my life as definitive, just relationships to just have in that moment that helped me to take a next step further along in my spiritual growth. If I wouldn't have given in to that, that I could have really missed out on growing in Christ in those moments. So those have just been relationships that have really just kind of carried me through these times. And even today, just having people that you can call on, and people that you can just say, hey, this is what I'm continuing to struggle with, and I think about like Jay Barbier. Jay Barbier is just a great friend, but we disciple each other, through these times, through these moments. And, those are just valuable relationships to continue to have.
I think there's been a push over the past several years, it seems like there is at least, on this concept or this idea of discipleship. I just feel like that term is being used a lot more now than it was maybe 10 years ago or whatever. There's more books being written about it. It seems like there's a huge emphasis on it. Can you just, for those who are listening who may be struggling, because we do seem to latch on like one thing or the other. And so some churches are like, well, our church is really big on evangelism, or our church is real big on discipleship. Will you kind of define for us a little bit discipleship and then that relationship with discipleship and evangelism and how, we should balance those in our church life?
Yeah, definitely. When you get down to the most basic definition of discipleship, you can go even to, Webster's and, all those things. It simply just means one that is a follower, right? Somebody that is following after what, somebody's teaching, and I think about, back during the original, the way that it was set up, even in the Jewish system, is that you had people that were following other people, and they would follow these rabbis. And when they, if the rabbi had curly hair going down the side of his face, well, you know what, that guy was going to have curly hair going down the side of his face. You tried to look as much like your rabbi as you possibly did. And so, that was such an important thing of how now whenever we think about discipleship, we are followers of who? Jesus Christ. And that means then that my life is to look as much like Jesus Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going around wearing, sashes or different things like what they wore during that time. But I'm just saying, for us today, what does this mean? It means that we are to continue to learn. That's what discipleship involves. It involves us continuing to learn. It involves our lifestyle. How does my life look more like Jesus? And I think that's a great question for even a young adult to stop and think about. In my workplace, at school, in my marriage, as a parent, how am I looking more like Jesus every single day? And then how am I just trusting and following him, meaning that I've got to look at God's word that tells me how I'm going to be a disciple. And I've got to say, do I really trust this? And if I really say that I trust in Jesus and I trust in his word, that's going to inform how I'm going to live. And therefore, I know how to follow him. I know as well that whenever temptation comes, what do I need to do, right? Whenever a life decision comes up, what do I need to do, right? These are the things that are so valuable for us. Now, when it comes to the whole discussion about discipleship, evangelism, I get different churches get on different, sides of that spectrum in different ways. But I think what we've really done here at New Vision, and I think this is just healthy overall for a church, is you got to look at it. And I think even, Tennessee Baptist says this, is that it's two sides of the same coin. You've got to have the evangelism side. You've got to have the discipleship side. And so we cannot deny by any kind of means that Jesus was an evangelist, right? You cannot deny it. You can't look and say, no, Jesus, he was just simply focused on his 12 disciples. Yes, he spent time with them, but you look at how he interacted. He taught, there was transformation. There were people that were following him. That is a picture of evangelism that's happening. But then there was the discipleship side where he took the disciples. He sent them out 2 by 2. He sent them out and he said, hey, go with this authority. And then you go back to the Great Commission, go and live this out for the glory of God. And, those are valuable things. So you have to see there's the two sides that are there. Now, you may emphasize one thing, just in practice of your church, but you cannot avoid the other side of the coin. Because if you're going to avoid the other side of the coin, you know what? That coin's going to be worthless. If you try to only have a one-sided coin, it's going to be worthless. And so you got to have both sides for it to be a real coin, for it to be something that's of value. And so in our church today, you got to have both sides of that. And I think sometimes we can get caught up on these both ends, but if you're not bringing that together in any type of way, you're really missing out on the fullness of what we're called to express as followers of Christ. So I hope that kind of steps in a little bit of that. And, sometimes it may look a little bit different from culture to culture and context to context of, you may be in a context of where, you're engaging in more gospel conversations on a regular basis. Okay. But you still got to have the bedrock foundations there of discipleship to help those people become multipliers that you do lead to Christ. But you also as well, you may be in a context of where, your church, you've got disciple followers, you got people that have been there for, a long time. How are you engaging them to help them go out and spread the gospel, We can't just take this truth and just go hide it away, by any kind of means. We've got to share it, and that's the call that we have, no matter where we are, no matter what context, no matter what age that we are, by any kind of means.
Yeah, I think that's a great picture that you just painted for us of just the importance and the necessity and how it impacted your own life. And I know for me, I never at any point realized, I guess, I was in discipleship situations. I didn't necessarily have somebody who was like, hey, I'm going to mentor and disciple you, and just like verbally came out and said it whenever I was growing up or trying to mature. But I just think about all the people who's poured into my life, all of those people who just let me live life with them. They were like, hey, I'm coming to do this, come with me. And I didn't realize really what was happening through that process, that they were intentionally trying to pour into me, and just how much I did learn from them, and how much I modeled and how much I still model the way that I do things and the way that I say things and the way that I approach situations is really, I'm doing it exactly how I saw them do it. And so it's the idea of like copying, if you lay down a piece of paper on a printer, the printer doesn't kick out something new, it kicks out a copy of that. And so I think that's the risk in discipleship sometimes too, is if we're discipling poorly, then we're producing bad copies sometimes. And so we have to make sure.
And Ryan, even to kind of hit on that as well, I think sometimes we have said discipleship only happens from the pulpit. And I please understand, the preaching of the word is central to everything, to evangelism, to discipleship. But that is not the only place. The people that have made the impact in our life, as you just said, are the ones that have modeled it with us, that have walked those hard journeys with us. Now, I'm just telling you, for discipleship of young adults today, you've got to be willing to step into modeling more and more. Not saying you got to be perfect by any kind of means, but you've got to be willing to step in and say, hey, let me just kind of show you what you can do from this. And I love what our women's director here, Dixie, she often says, she goes, she thinks about her daughter. She goes, where you are, I've been, and where I am, you're going. And I think that's a really good statement to remember about, just even the call for maybe somebody that's listening on this today, and they're like, you know what, I'm 50 or 60 years old. What am I going to say to a young adult? You can go back, you can say, hey, we can learn from each other through this just as much as you can learn from me. So I think that does, speaking a little bit of what you're talking about, that modeling emphasis is so valuable.
When I got just a follow-up question based on what you just said. When you've, in time of just discipling, whether it be young adults or just youth, or in where you are right now, I know a lot of times in coming up, there's this desire for, and I know I've been through it. I'm sure everybody here has been through it. Just this desire to kind of forge your own path, so to speak, or just try things in a different way than somebody that may be a mentor of yours or somebody that you may look up to differently. I know we on a previous podcast had a conversation about just the gap that can sometimes be between an older generation and a younger generation. How have you been able to navigate giving somebody that you may be discipling the leeway to kind of discover versus guiding them in a certain direction, if that question makes sense?
Yes, yeah. I think it comes down to understanding about failure. Let's, just being honest and blunt about it is, if I'm going to disciple somebody, I'm older than them, the reality is, they're going to make their own decisions. Yes. Mm-hmm. Question comes of, what are you going to do when something doesn't work out the way that you're expecting it? And how are you going to learn to, this is a phrase we say here a lot of, how are you going to learn to fail forward through this? Understand that there is grace that's there, that's available for you. Yes, God's grace is sufficient. It's abundant. Yes. But how are we also going to learn from this so that we don't make the same mistake again, or we're not stepping into that again. And I think that's kind of where sometimes maybe the generations get it wrong, is that, one, we assume that everybody's already failed and that we assume that they're already messed up just because of what generation that they're in. And so there's no hope for them. So why even spend time with them? And that's a wrong view to have. And I think as well that whenever somebody does mess up, that we constantly say, we begin to think, well, they're just done. I'm throwing my hands up. They're just not going to listen to me or anything like that. I think those are the significant moments of discipleship, just like what you're talking about here, of just, whenever somebody does struggle in their marriage, they struggle with what they've said, right? How are we teaching them to go and, ask for forgiveness and to realize, hey, you know what? We've all been there. We've all messed up. And it may feel awkward, but man, there's such breakthrough that can happen in those moments. And so how you address that, how you help people just to keep on moving forward, just say, you know what, you learn from this. Now, what did we learn? Why, right? And that I think is a big question that sometimes we miss out on, is asking the question, well, why did this happen? And we just want to fix things today. And a lot of times when it comes to trying to fix things in our lives, honestly, we end up doing, we get right back in the same cycle over and over again, because we haven't really addressed why. Why did this happen? What was the struggle that you faced there? And we're not willing to step into those conversations, not to try and fix lives or anything like that. It's, but to let people learn how to keep moving forward in the grace of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so I don't want to sound cliche-ish by any kind of means, because I think that's a real thing that you got to understand with young adults, is that they are going to mess up. And we're all going to mess up. We all still mess up to this day. I mean, I mess up every single day, it feels like, but at the same time as well, how am I helping somebody to keep moving forward in Christ, to understand what God's grace is, to understand the call that's upon our lives, and understand as well that, we can keep on growing. We just got to ask the right questions and take the right actions based off of that. So, and that's a discipleship moment in that. And honestly, I don't know if y'all experience this as well, but I mean, a huge thing that's happening today is churches involved in counseling, and how you are helping people to address these moments. And I mean, this is happening. This is the trend in young adults, is that, we're getting more and more requests here of just people that are below the age, I would say, of 30, wanting biblical counseling. And they just need to have those conversations of how to help navigate failure, how to help navigate so that they learn how to take the next best steps in their walk. And so being able to provide that is such a valuable thing.
Yeah, and that's when they need discipleship the most, right? Most of the time, right at the moment that we wash our hands of that relationship is when they need us the most, when they do mess up, when they do need that counseling. And a lot of that, I think, is maybe that struggle to connect across generations, because there is a increasing gap between maybe some of the struggles, or they're being amplified with technology and social media, or this generation is just being a lot more honest and open about mental health struggles or whatever it may be. And so there, some older generations might struggle with connecting or understanding, like, why are you having these thoughts? Why are you having these struggles? Because they didn't walk through that. And so I'll give a personal example, personal story, and then I'll kind of ask you to follow up. But this idea of discipleship not just being like a cliche for a season, but it being a biblical thing. I had somebody, because like I said, I didn't have anybody like just come out and say, hey, I want to disciple and mentor you. That's something I've tried to really do, is like be very intentional in saying like, hey, I see something in you I'd love to be able to pour into if you would like that discipleship type relationship. And I had a guy who was older than me, and he was trying, I guess, to give me ministry advice or whatever. And he was like, be careful on this discipleship thing because, people might think that you're trying to play favorites. And I was like, what are you talking about, discipleship thing? Like, that is a command of Jesus to go and make disciples. Like, the word Christian is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. The word disciple is mentioned over 260 times in the Bible. Like, we're called to be disciples even more than this term Christian that we're being used, which Christian means like Christ. But if we're like Christ, then we're going to be disciples. We're going to raise people up in discipleship. And so do you think people fall away from this idea of discipleship either, and it may be several reasons, but maybe one, because they've never truly had that mentor or disciple? Do you think it has something to do with they just struggle connecting with the next generation, or maybe they've made mistakes and so they're afraid? Do you think it's because they don't feel equipped? Why do you think we struggle so much in this connectivity when it comes to discipleship?
Yeah, I think it's probably the biggest thing is time. We are busy people, and we all just, and honestly, sometimes the thing that we our time reveals our values. How we spend our time is what we value, and so I think there's a struggle with that. If that we are, I mean, you think about even like a post-COVID world, we are busier than ever. It feels like. And so it's just making that investment of time for that next generation. I think that's one thing. I think you're right as well, though, about we so much want to be just the stop it people. Whenever we're talking from one generation to the next, what I mean by that is Bob Newhart. He was there's an old clip of him as like a counselor or whatever, psychiatrist, I can't remember, but anyways, somebody comes in and he goes, okay, I've got an answer to your problem, and he looks at him and he goes, all right, yeah, what is it? And the guy just looks at him, and Bob Newhart, he goes, stop it. And I think sometimes we think, well, yeah, that's just gonna, I'm gonna just look at you, I'm gonna just say, stop it, just stop doing that, and then you'll be okay, and it's like, well, I mean, there's some real issues. There's some real things that are happening with some people that we just need to step into. And this is where I kind of finished in, the chapter here. We got to remember discipleship is messy.
Yeah.
And it is a mess because why? We are willing to get into each other's lives. And we have to be willing, both parties involved. The person that's going to receive discipleship and the discipler, you've got to both be willing to step into the mess and to walk away and say at the same time, you know what? God took that mess. Jesus took that mess on the cross. He took all my mess on the cross. And I may not know exactly what to say in this time to help somebody grow. I may not as well be ready to receive what's being said at this time. But we can come together realizing that we both have messes in our life that we just need to step into and let God do the work through that. Not me individually. I'm just stepping in. I'm just being available, letting God just use me in that way. And so I think that's a thing, for churches that are out here that are maybe struggling to connect with young adults. And everybody says that, we want to reach young adults. We want to reach young adults. Okay, let me ask you, are you willing to step into the mess of young adults? Because if you're not willing to step into the mess of young adults, honestly, you're going to keep on being a shiny, perfect church on the outside. If you're really willing to step into the mess, you got to be willing to have some messy conversations. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect all the time, but it means as well that you're going to start to reflect more of the gospel in that moment. You're going to start to reflect more of what it means to step into lives, because that's what Jesus did. He stepped into messes. I think about the woman at the well. She showed up at the worst time possible. Why? Because she was a mess. Now, what did Jesus stepped into the mess. He stepped into her life and she walked away changed. Praise the Lord for that. So the same thing has to happen for us in our churches, is that we got to be well. And I'm not saying compromise truth by any kind of means. That's not what it means. It means you got to be willing to meet people where they are in order to help them to take a next step towards Christ. And I just think, just a personal thing here. I just got back from England, where we just did a mission trip there. And just some of the conversations that we just had, with people that were there is, some people that they're just adamant of just, I'm just not going to believe. I'm just, religion stuff is just for somebody else, all those things. And then you had conversations with people that, they were agnostic, that you had some that kind of had an idea of who Jesus was, all those things. And I just think about, just living on mission in those moments of how, you never know who's going to walk by, but you're ready to step into a conversation with somebody because the gospel is greater in that moment than any mess of somebody's life. Yeah, I think it's such a valuable thing. The gospel is greater. We have the best news in the world that we get to share. We get to pass on generation after generation until the Lord comes back. And you know what? It's not going to be perfect on our side, but man, we can do what we can to just step into that more and more and more. And I think that brings that back around kind of where we were beginning at with this evangelism and discipleship. You got to have both, especially when it comes to young adults.
Yeah, and I think that just, again, shows the importance of us pursuing Christ, because we all have our own messes. And I think that may keep us sometimes from trying to pour into young adults, because we're like, well, I have so much going on with my own family, with my own spouse, with my own kids. How can I possibly get my hands any dirtier with other people's messes? But that's what we're called to do. And it takes intentionality on our part to schedule the time to do it, to schedule the finances to do it. You're not going to accidentally fall into a discipleship relationship. It takes that intentional effort, and especially with young adults. And, I'm still actively serving in a local church context with young adults. Sometimes it takes extreme patience. I mean, I had a guy a couple months ago who specifically after a Bible study was like, hey, can I talk to you? And he said, I know I need a mentor. Will you mentor me? Which rarely happens. And I was like, sure. And then he ghosted me for the next 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I was like, you asked for this, and you're not answering the phone. He wasn't at one of our Bible studies, and he wasn't returning a text message. And now here, several months later, we've been able to kind of pour into him a little bit and things like that. But it's not been the, what you would see as a cookie cutter mentorship process. It's taken more patience than I've wanted to give for it, but it's just part of it sometimes because of schedules or life or their mess. I know that, a lot of that had to do with a lot of mess that's going on in his own life. And so I've just had to be patient of, he wants it, but he may not be ready. So what is that, responsibility on our end, but also the responsibility on kind of the mentee's end? Because, you can give advice to people, you can pour into people, you can be a good influence of somebody, but can you truly disciple somebody who doesn't want to be discipled? What do you think about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a really good question, because there's a part of where, I think there eventually would be even the hunger for somebody to be discipled, if they're a follower of Christ, and I think that sometimes comes about of just how we encourage people in their next steps. Like as a church, do we have a discipleship process that's in place? Do we have a clear next step for somebody? And so there is the individual responsibility. The individual, yes, they, as a follower of Christ, there ought to be this hunger, there ought to be this desire. Now, sometimes they may not know about that yet, and that's where the patience comes, right? And that's where we're having to keep on showing them. But we've got to do our part of saying, here is your next step as a follower of Christ. Here's what the clear next thing for you to do is, and how you're going to grow into more and more like Christ. Not just doing, but what do we want to do? We want to encourage them to show fruit. We want to encourage them on how to put off the old way of living and put on the new way of living in Christ. And And for some people, that's going to take some time. That's going to take some really, breaking of some things that the Lord, he breaks it in that moment. Yes, but it's working through some of these things. And so once again, that's where that mess comes back. Now, I think as well, eventually, that comes back to, if we're not doing that, then all we're doing in those moments sometimes may be that we're just focusing on one side of the coin, and we're going back. Oh, look, we had a great decision. That this person came forward. They did their thing. But if we're not providing a next step in that, we're almost maybe hurting that person more than helping that person to grow in Christ. And so I think that's where the church has that responsibility. It is up ultimately to that individual. And that's where I think you're getting into this a little bit, Ryan. Just, we have to be intentional. We got to be consistent as well. How are we staying consistent in those things, saying the same things over and over again, and then just being authentic? Because, y'all know, people are drawn to authenticity. And if they hear cookie cutter, if they hear, like this is, just, hey, you just do this and then you're done, that's not authentic living for Christ. It's how do I communicate that, yeah, what, been there and I've messed up in this, but I want to help you to walk through this. I think whenever they hear that, they're drawn to that authenticity, and that helps to provide that staying part. Now, the other part of this, I think that's the individual level. But I think the collective level as well is, how do we get people connected into a small group? Because they need to be around other believers, other people that are trying to walk out that same journey, so that they can learn from them as well. Because I think sometimes it's like, somebody comes forward, they make a decision for Christ, okay, great. And then they go off and they try to do their own thing, and they end up struggling over and over and over again. But whenever we could get somebody to help them take that next step into either group or a serving opportunity, whatever that is, for them to see who they are more and more in Christ, all that does is help them just to grow. And it builds community around them, that they know that they're not in this alone, and that what they're doing is a part of the greater story for the glory of God. Now, that sounds like really, really good, and I understand that's a struggle, consistent struggle, but it's valuable. It's valuable. That's the main thing we got to do, is build that consistency, authenticity that happens individually and collectively as well. So providing those groups, providing that community opportunity for people to connect is so important. And I just encourage churches that are maybe listening to this, pastors, you need to really evaluate what you're calling sometimes young adult group. Do you have some 50s and 60-year-olds that just won't move on? That can become a little awkward for young adults trying to step into community, because you got different levels of conversation, different life levels that are happening in these moments. So how are you providing that place, that community for that person that's in that stage of life that needs that as much as possible? And let me just I want to throw in just kind of a little bit, even something, this is, I know we sound like really serious on here and a lot of things, but I just want to encourage you as well. As you're just engaging young adults, have joy of the Lord with you. Have some fun. Do some things. Again, I'm not saying compromise by any kind of means, but, provide opportunities for people to just enjoy living the Christian life together. And I think that right there just totally rocks people's world when it comes to the church, because they think so much of the institution of the church that they get so stuck up on that. They think just all these, rules, regulations, all these things. But man, the greatest joy that I've experienced is just being in those relationships, having fun, doing fun things together, just in those relationships is so valuable. That's such a sticking point for people. And so, that's why, like whenever we've done podcasts here, just like what you guys are doing, we make it fun. We make it enjoyable, because we want it to be something that people want to come to, want to listen, want to enjoy. And so the same thing is so true in our churches of, providing a place, providing something that people want to come. They want to invite their lost friends to come to. They want to invite other young adults that are desperate for community to come to and to enjoy together. So that's what I just encourage you to do.
Yeah, and you've shared a few, but say there's somebody listening and they're like, okay, Joseph, I see the importance, I see the need, maybe I struggle connecting with young adults, or I don't know any young adults, maybe outside of my family. What are like 3 or 4 or 5 tips you would give to somebody of, like, here are just some easy, practical ways that you can start this discipleship relationship with a young adult?
Yeah, I would say, one, build the collective first, and then go for the individual. And I know that kind of sounds, different, but what I mean by that is, whenever people see that they're a part of something bigger, they're a part of there's this whole phrase of critical mass that's out there, that's going to help them to stay engaged. And so that's what we use, like events here at our church, to not just have an event, but to be a next step into discipleship. So, I mean, man, like if it's a church that's out here that maybe you're just struggling, whatever, finding maybe either a place where young adults gather. Now, once again, I'm not saying compromise by any kind of means, but there's places where young adults gather. You can meet some people where they are, coffee shops. You can meet them at...
Young adults love coffee shops.
What's that?
Young adults love coffee shops.
They love coffee shops, right? So going and saying, hey, can we just meet here? Can we have just a young adult night here? Whatever that is, and just inviting, starting people within your church to invite there. Once again, start broad and then work towards the individual. And so, having some things like that, those are going to help people be like, okay, they're trying to meet me where they are. And once again, I would say, don't get there and feel like, okay, I've got to automatically right here, whenever we first get in here, we've got to have a conversation about, we've got to dig into Jeremiah. It's like, people aren't going to do that, right? Because one, we're dealing with just a lack of biblical literacy anyways. You got to start where people are. And so it's going to be just having just some of those conversations, building relationships, starting that process, but then taking them to being intentional about where you're going to take them to as a group. And, and sometimes that may mean that you just meet in different times, meet at different places, whatever that is. But you've got to remember the overall goal is to connect young adults and to help them to take their next step towards multiplying as disciples.
That's
if
so
we
good.
keep that as the overall thing, that's going to change the way that we've done things, yes, but we can still keep the same principles. So starting with the collective, so key. Start to find some of those individuals in there. There are going to be some key leaders, some key people that are just going to be motivators, encouragers, that they're going to be the ones that are showing that. And you start building into them, pouring into them as much as you can. And then those will be the people that are going to bring people along. They're going to bring other young adults along to say, yeah, this is something that's worth, spending time. Because, that is always the thing that's a struggle with young adults. You get playing something and they're flighty, right? If they find something that is of better value to them and it's going to be cheaper or whatever it is, it's not even cheaper nowadays, right? It's just, if it's something that they're going to be able to create a more memorable experience around, then they're going to go and do that. And so how can you provide a memorable experience for people and that they want to be around, that they want to experience again and again? That's a key thing. That's a key value, that you just keep providing that for people. That will help them to take their next step from the collective. And then you just start finding those people. You slowly just start building in individually and picking 2 or 3 here and there. And you just start building those relationships with them here and there. And that will be how you slowly start to build up more and more of this. And listen, churches that are listening, you gotta set aside some budget for it. You gotta put some resources into it. If you have staff people that can help you out with that, do it. I want to tell you, it is a valuable investment that you're making in helping to get those people connected to their next step.
Well, Joseph, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. If somebody who has been listening wants to connect with you, ask you some more questions individually, maybe check out the podcast you have, what are some ways they can connect with you?
Yeah, the quickest way would just be by email, joseph.brasher@newvisionlife.com. Of course, you can always go to our website for our church of newvisionlife.com. If you want to see anything about marriage-wise, you can just go to josephbrasher.com. But, just even cell phone, I don't care about giving that out. It's 901-451-3711. And just shoot me a text, give me a call. I mean, I'm here. I love just being available to help kingdom-wise more than anything else. So, and Ryan, I just want to say, man, how much I appreciate you just stepping into this and leading our state so well. So thank you again for this opportunity for this.
And thanks so much for joining us. Lorenzo, thanks, man. It's been a good one. It's been good. And just on behalf of the Tennessee Baptist Mission Board, for those who are listening, thanks so much for your gifts to the cooperative program, the Golden Offering for Tennessee Missions. Without your partnership and cooperation, things like this couldn't happen. So thank you for your giving. Continue to support because it's making an impact right here in Tennessee. Special shout out again to Colby Mike for editing and engineering this. And until we meet again, go win Tennessee for Jesus. Thanks so much. Bye.